If that thing that made that sound was a mouth, and you have a mouth, you can do the same thing. And you might say, no, I've heard that the tongues in Asia are different than tongues in Canada. Nonsense. No, there's no evidence for that. I'm sorry. When you're learning pronunciation, you want to learn pronunciation. So what about those symbols? Well, there are different ways to write pronunciation. You can write it using specific symbols. There are different systems of symbols. And you can also write it phonetically. I actually prefer, if you're going to try to write pronunciation, to write it phonetically because it can at least give you an idea for how to say something. For example, right? If you want to phonetically write the word P-H-I-L, you might write P-H-I-L with a simpler phonetic sort of spelling as F-I-L-L, because it's pronounced the same way as F-I-L-L, and nobody is in doubt about how to say it. So that could be a phonetic spelling. I'm not sure if that's the official phonetic spelling, but they try to give you a sense of it, right? The problem with the symbols is that if you don't know the symbols, it doesn't tell you anything. At least with the phonetic spelling, it gives you an intuition for how it might be said. But with the symbols, you get no intuition. You just have to memorize it. And only once you memorize the entire thing do you then get some clue about how something is pronounced. But then there's another problem. Unfortunately, those symbols cannot accurately capture all the sounds in the language. So it's misleading because you might have two words which have the same phonetic symbol in their phonetic representation, which actually sounds slightly differently in real life. So what have you done? You've focused your attention rather, on the symbols instead of focusing on what you should, which is the sounds. You're needlessly emphasizing an intermediate step that is not helping you. The intermediate is, I want to learn this. I want to learn C. I'm here. So instead of learning C directly, I'm going to go through B and then to C. And unfortunately, some information is lost in B before you get to C, being those subtle differences in how things are actually said. Also, then, those symbols don't train you for how to hear word differences, how to hear sound differences. So you're not training your ear at all. So my view on this is to throw it away. Never look at a phonetic symbol again for the rest of your life. They, in my opinion, are not useful, are not helpful, and in fact, hurt your ability to learn pronunciation correctly. If you're going to use anything, go for the natural-looking phonetic symbol just when you're not sure how to say something and you need an idea, right? But the real way to learn pronunciation is to open your ears, listen, and then try to copy the sounds that you hear. That's the shadowing approach. So if I hear someone say whatever it is, bleh, I would, that's not a word, but I would think, okay, how did they say bleh? And how do I make my sound the same as theirs? There's a boo and then a bleh. There's a, what? So that's just a stupid example, but what I'm doing is removing, okay, that's a word or that's a sound. I'm getting rid of that. Don't focus on, hey, that's a word. Focus on the things that you need to do with your mouth in order for you to match the thing that you are hearing, right? If that thing that made that sound was a mouth and you have a mouth, you can do the same thing. And you might say, no, I've heard that the tongues in Asia are different than tongues in Canada. Nonsense. No, there's no evidence for that. I'm sorry. So any mouth with the tongue that is generally shaped in the right way can make any sound that you hear, right? And of course, some things are more difficult than others, but it's a matter of developing your awareness to hear that's the things in that word that make the sounds, the little pieces, and then figure out a way to make your mouth do the same thing, right? So with a word like usually, a lot of people struggle with that. They say they say either usually, or usually, and that's okay. You can say usually, but usually is the correct pronunciation. Okay, so how do I do that? I hear the you. Okay, I gotta get the you. How do I make that sound? Not but subtle difference there, but very important. The voice is continuing. Don't say but usual. And then there's a li at the end with a continued voice. Not usually, but usually. The voice is continuing. So all of these things you start to pick up if you're training your ears to hear the sounds, and you're training your ability, your awareness, to notice the difference between what you're saying and what you're hearing. I'm saying usually, and they're saying usually. So I need to change that to usual. And now you're far away from even thinking of this as a word. It doesn't matter anymore because you're emphasizing just the sounds. Finally, you get it. Usually. By the time you've gone through all of that, you've practiced so much, you've repeated it so much, it's much easier to remember. The other issue with the phonetic symbols is you see it and you say, got it. You haven't got it. You just know what the phonetic symbols are. You haven't got it until you can say it perfectly. And going through that process that we just did there with usually, that kind of awkward, silly-looking process is going to develop your habits so that you refine your listening, so that you build up your awareness, and so that once you've finished going through that process, you now have the habits to say that word correctly every time. Because when you're speaking about something, you don't want to have to think about pronunciation, right? You want it to just come out naturally, automatically the first time. So, in my experience, that's the best way to learn pronunciation. You can flush all of your phonetic symbols down the toilet as far as I'm concerned. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you want to learn pronunciation with this approach, check out my course called Advanced American English Pronunciation. It is about 8 hours long, focusing on all of this stuff for 8 hours and much, much more. So check that out in the links in the description. And of course, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.